Well, welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar. Today, Are You Ready? Biosecurity Lessons in Planning and Response. My name's Carl Larsen from RMCG, one of the delivery partners in the National Vegetable Extension Network down in Victoria. And we're joined today by Greg Owens of NT Farmers up in the Territory, broadcasting out of Alice Springs today at the local DPI offices. And I've also got Jess Lye from AUSVEG on the line too. So today's topics, and before we get to those, just a little bit of an overview of what VegNET is. It was essentially designed to get research and development out onto vegetable farms. There's quite a significant amount of investment annually in R&D activities via the vegetable levy, which is administered by Hort Innovation. And the aim there is to maximise the leverage and adoption of that R&D on farm. So there's 10 projects nationally. Greg and his team at NT Farmers delivering the Northern Territory. And then in Queensland, 3 others in the Bowen, Gumlu, Far North Queensland area, Wide Bay, Burnett and South East Queensland. And in New South Wales, the local land services deliver that particular project. Gippsland's shared between RMCG and East Gippsland Food Cluster. There's a project covering the whole of Tasmania, as is there in South Australia with AUSVEG SA, and over in the West, Vegetables WA. So today we've got Jess Lye, who's the Manager of Science and Extension at AUSVEG, and today she's going to be providing the researcher perspective. We're just waiting for Jess to join us on the line from a remote office. And we've also got Greg Owens, CEO of NT Farmers, as I mentioned, and he's going to be providing the VegNET practitioner perspective and more recently building on some of the lessons from the CGMMV incursion in the Northern Territory. And obviously with the tomato-potato psyllid as well over in the West, there's been quite a heightened focus on exotic pest prevention, but also management with the transition to management plans starting over in Western Australia. Now, just as we get Jess on the line, I might actually just flip things around a bit and start with Greg Owens from NT Farmers. Greg, if that's okay with you, I'll just hand over the mouse and keyboard to Greg to take us through his presentation. Before we do that, just a quick little poll to get an understanding of who's on the line. You'll notice a poll up on your screen now. How much experience do you have with biosecurity? There's a couple of options there to choose from if you wouldn't mind filling out at the moment. So a lot, a bit, not much, or none, but keen to know more. That just gives us an understanding of who's on the line and where to pitch some of the messages and Q&A session. So I see we've got most people voting now. I'll just close that poll and share back the results with you. So Greg, look, interesting to see that we've got quite a big cohort with a bit and not much in the middle there, and a few of us with lots. So that just gives us a good understanding of where everyone's up to. So Greg, I might hand over to you now and share your screen. So let me just do that. And Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Carl, and welcome everybody. Yeah, biosecurity impact on growers and growing areas has been quite intense just lately, and we'll add food safety to that. We feel for our brethren that are in the melon industry that are taking a severe hit in the market, as well as in the confidence of the growers. So the perspective I'm coming from the Northern Territory was the perspective of a jurisdiction that popped a biosecurity incursion and exotic in the first instance, and very much the same sort of response happened in West Australia on the tomato potato psyllid. The initial response is quite severe, and people have to be very careful. And you have to keep in mind that what we're dealing with is an industry that can be worth millions of dollars. We're a small jurisdiction in the north, but the CGMMV, the cucumber green mottle mosaic virus, threatened close on $70 million worth of production in the north, and that happens during the winter months, and shut down probably about certainly more than half of that. The melon industry was back to only 1 or 2 farms out of a dozen within a couple of months of the incursion. So there's a whole range of farmers that are impacted, from very, very large farmers through to the very small veggie type growers. Just for those that don't know the territory, CGMMV came in 2014, towards the end of the growing season. It was first identified in Katherine, in the big melon farms, and there's the map there shows you the pink and yellow is where the farms were. They were immediately shut down once the disease was diagnosed and confirmed as CGMMV and an exotic incursion. It took another probably 6 months before the first detections were found in Darwin, and they were found in the melon farm and 4 veggie farms, and quite distinctly geographically scattered. So that followed on that really intense response we had, the initial survey done by the NT quarantine guys that were incredibly diligent in their work there to start with, tested crops right through Katherine and the Darwin rural area. A lot of that was to maintain market access, and while we're concentrating on a biosecurity outcome, we've got to remember that wherever possible, we need to continue trade, and for the Northern Territory, we need to trade outside our borders. There's not enough market in the Territory to take 1% of our product, let alone all of it. So the key was keeping market access, and the other jurisdictions were agreed to take our fruit and vegetables products as long as they had confidence that they had been tested and found to be disease-free. So initially, everything was tested. Farmers that needed to get their product to market were very keen to get tested so they could get their certificate and get it out. So initially, all the vegetable guys went clear, but the second round of testing at the start of 2015 picked up 4 vegetable farms. In the first round of testing, in the first 10, which scared everybody. Going back, I'm just clicking the mouse a bit too fast here. And it was within some fairly densely populated vegetable areas. So this is a slide of a little area around Bar Road at Maracay, which is probably an hour out of Darwin, heading towards Arnhem Land or Kakadu. They're all the pins are cucurbit farms. All of those were susceptible to CGMMV, but only the one with the little red square in it was actually an infected property. Right. So when that infection occurred, that really put the wind up everybody in that area, and we went directly to a very, very strong response on how to protect all those growers in that area from getting some feedback from somewhere. That a disease that could be easily spread simply by touch or animals or birds or anything. So that's where the response became really critical. The majority of those growers are Vietnamese and Cambodian background, but we had done an engagement program with them in a previous vegetable program, and we did have contacts with those key growers in that area. So we very quickly put together a simple program by which they could protect themselves, and that's a bit of what I want to talk about. So we developed a fairly simple template. We'll slip into it on the next page, where the guys could just check that they were doing everything they needed in the area. We got most of the, matter of fact, all of the sections out of the Biosecurity plant health website, which is a great resource. Tailored it for CGMMV and the NT, and then went out quickly to the growers to say, how do we put this in place to protect you guys from what's just next door? So we had some initial meetings. We've got an international expert with Dr. Aviv coming in from Israel. We got our biosecurity template plans out, and we started some training. I see the guys up in the top right-hand corner quite enjoyed that afternoon's training with a free biosecurity sign to hang on the gate once they're finished. We ran training programs on weed hosts and monitoring those and doing collections for sampling. We were part of our interstate trading agreements at that time was that each farm had to then put in place a biosecurity farm plan, and they had to be audited by NT Quarantine. So we got those guys along to one of our farm meetings and to run a mock audit with a group of other farmers, so they had a good chance to see what was going to be in the farm plan and then how they were going to be checked against that farm plan to see if they were compliant. And at Sonny's place there, the biggest corrective action he had to make was where he was going to put his washdown area for machinery coming on and off the farm. There was an area, a lower area near the front fence, which you could get into without travelling through his vegetable area. That was his small mango orchard, where we could put enough gravel and wash down that he could then wash down his machinery before going into his vegetable area. So that was the kind of activity we did, and we did it very, very quickly. And the remarkable thing was that we didn't spread that disease from that farm to this day. And we're all back in production. So a quick look at the just one page out of that template we used to give the growers. We pulled photos from areas in the Northern Territory. That was the farm gate across from the infected property, the snake bean seedlings that they used, the melon farmers down there that are checking the seed depth and their planters, etc. And then covered off all the sections that are in the Plant Health Australia Biosecurity checklist stuff. So in the background, and I must acknowledge the tremendous support we got from AUSVEG, particularly Jess and her team, to represent us and get us a seat on the national committees, etc., that were investigating where the response would go and how it could be managed. So there was a lot of back behind the scenes stuff. There was probably a little bit too much procrastination about whether this disease could or couldn't be eradicated, to the point where we had found it in the weeds outside the fences, and then the decision was made that it was no longer viable to eradicate. So that actually brings into play a couple of little questions about being the first jurisdiction to be diagnosed with an exotic, in that the longer it takes for that committee to make a decision, the less likely the people that have already been affected by it might be eligible for compensation under some sort of eradication plan. So that's just something, a learning we had out of that. If we'd made some earlier decisions, people may have got some compensation through the vegetable health levy. Really good news is we haven't seen it on a melon or a vegetable farm since that 2015 detection. We did find it on the research station, which has just been totally eradicated by Cyclone Marcus anyway. Which is particularly sad because it took out the social club and the bridges. We no longer need interstate certificates for every crop, but we do have to have our on-farm biosecurity plans still there and still audited. The follow-up project, the CGMMV R&D project, is a national one headed by Dr. Lucy Tran-Ewan in the Territory. She's doing a lot more work on seed testing, transmission by bees, diagnostics, soil half-life, etc. Has come to almost to the end of the first round of that project and is just throwing up a lot more questions. So I know Lucy's looking to see where she can go from there and looking at more how we can get some answers to some of those questions she's found. So I would like to acknowledge that other states now also share this disease, and the fact that we were able to share initially some resources with WA when they were found positive for CGMMV actually really highlights the value of the network that the VegNET project provides. So through that VegNET network, we were able to share resources, and WA did a great job on adapting them to their situation and helping us with some translation. So that was our experience, Carl. It was quite scary at the start. I think we got on top of the management really quickly because we had access to farms and leading farmers that were willing to listen, that they needed to listen because they needed the market access. So there's a whole lot of things in play that make that VegNet person a really key facilitator between probably the farmers and the regulators in this state.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Greg. And I think it's one of those topics, as you mentioned, when it happened, it was pretty scary. But I think having these kind of candid sessions, and the reason we've tackled biosecurity today is so that we're learning from each time we do it. And I think some of those insights you've just provided there are both really useful, but also really interesting just to see how it played out. And those key points you raised, Greg, just around access to the farms, access to the leading growers up front, and that driver of export, but also having that regional network set up and established on the ground seem to be pretty key success factors. How we'd like to run this today is just more interactive. You'll notice on your side panel there's a questions breakout box where you can type questions in. Please feel free at any stage to type those in, and I can put those to our two presenters. And Greg, I might just kick off while we're waiting for a couple to come in. We were talking earlier just around what are the key questions you're still getting from growers, and one of those was, how do you manage the property when you've actually got to pick up and deliver produce on farm and you've got quite a bit of traffic and people movement?
Yeah, it's a question that arises when biosecurity wasn't part of the planning that people had in mind. The good lucky thing is that most people have their sheds reasonably close to the road because that's the closest and cheapest place to get power. But sometimes that's not the case. The sheds and the houses, etc., are at the back of the farm, and pick-up and deliveries need to actually go through the growing area. Now, it's really important in that case that the roadway is maintained with good gravel. Bitumen's probably a bit expensive, but even there, just making sure that the trucks and the vehicles only travel on that roadway. There's a designated pick-up and put-down point at the back, and that wherever possible you minimise that interaction between the road and your growing area. It's certainly not ideal. The ideal issue is to have have your shed pick up deliveries at the front of the shed, at the front of the property, so that you can maintain a public area, dirty area, public area, away from your clean going area. So we've had a couple of guys look to upgrade their roads. We've had another couple look to positioning their sheds so that they can minimise the interaction between the clean area where they're trying to farm and keep it clean, and the area where the pickups, deliveries, and people and visitors and power readers and regulators of all sorts, and I think they can wander on and off properties.
Yeah, that's great. We've got a question in from Tony Philippi. Thanks, Tony, for the question. He's just asked, before the incursion, what was the growers' attitude to biosecurity and willingness to be involved, I guess, before it was a problem?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Tony, and it's really interesting that the couple of farms that were actually focused on biosecurity, which were our more professional watermelon and rockmelon farms in Katherine, were actually the first people to get this disease, and it snuck through. We believe in the seed. Nobody's going to make that definitive statement yet, but and what they thought was good biosecurity certainly turned out to be have its hollows in it. I think that gave a warning to our vegetable growers, and we could point to million-dollar melon farms being shut down by this disease. And so, where it hadn't been in the psyche of the small vegetable growers to that point, they got a very, I think, timely warning. And then when they were all tested and found to be clean on the first round, they were then very, very conscious of keeping clean. To the point where a lot of those Asian melons, you see those ones up the screen, those long melons, smooth looper, they keep their own seeds. They're open pollinated. And once we learned that this virus was actually able to be transmitted by seed, once they were tested clean and they knew their fruit was clean, they only kept their own seed. They wouldn't share it with anybody else. And they certainly didn't accept seed from anybody else. So that level of awareness went from almost nothing to extremely high in about 3 months. So that when the first veggie guys did go positive, the 4 of them, I think everybody was ready to implement as quick as possible.
Yeah, great. Tony, thanks very much for that question. It's a really important point that you raised, that there are those preventative protocols there within industry, and it usually does take this push just to actually look at the implementation and adoption of those at a large scale. But prevention always better than a cure, I'd imagine, when it comes to this type of thing. Greg, sorry, Greg.
You can't get on a melon farm in the Katherine Mataranka region now unless you've got an exceptionally good reason. We'll have them in town rather than actually go to the farm. So they maintain incredibly tight control on who comes on and off the farm and where and how they do that, and their inputs right across the field. So it's where we thought we had reasonable biosecurity, we've stepped it up 100% or more.
Yeah, it's an amazing case study of uptake, isn't it? Greg, another question we've got through is just from Michelle saying, washdown areas, what's the best way to set them up if you're working with growers that haven't got those facilities established? You know, where are you putting it? What does it involve? And what does it look like?
Yeah, you can go to the $1 million concrete sumps, etc. The guys I was working with didn't have anywhere near those sort of funds available. So it was a case of it needed to be somewhere either outside the front of the property or just inside their fence lines, where they could be washed on gravel or a bitumen hardpan if they had it, and that the Washdown was directed away from that gravel into an area. So we had to watch which way the water was going to basically a runoff area that was then out of bounds for machinery and people, etc. The key in that case too was also monitoring the weeds in that area to make sure we didn't have any host weeds growing from that washdown. It wasn't a huge issue for most, because once those gates were shut, very little of the machinery was moving backwards and forwards. Before that, farmers were quite ready to share machinery from one farm to another. But again, like the seeds, as soon as the incursion was known, then not only was it farm machinery, but even vehicles that used to come on and off the neighbours' farms stopped at the front gate, and people walked through the footpath to go down to get their other guys.
No, that's great. Well, Greg, thanks very much for your presentation, and also everyone on the line for providing those questions through. Feel free to keep sending them. Jess, we've now got you on the line. Can you hear us? So I've just unmuted you.
Thanks, Carl. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. What I'll do is I'll just switch over Greg's screen to yours, and we'll get your presentation up. And while we're doing that, I should mention too, for Jess's presentation, we're going to zoom back out now to the national level and look at what is the national context from a biosecurity point of view, and also some of the main biosecurity threats and pests of concern by state, to get that kind of beyond the regional perspective that we've just got from Greg. What else is happening in other key growing regions? There's also a number of key projects at the moment that Jess and her team at AUSVEG are running. And to complement the presentation, in the side panel, you'll see there's a handout box. There's a couple of handouts that we've uploaded for you today. One around a TPP fly, and there's also a couple of vegetable leaf miner posters, one around a project summary, but also an awareness poster. I'll let Jess talk to those a bit more, but just to let you know they're there and you just can click to download. Jess, I'll hand over to you to walk through your presentation, and we might have some questions at the end, or if something pertinent comes up on the way through, we might have a chat then too. So over to you.
Thanks a lot, Carl, and thank you very much for RMCG through VegNET for inviting me to speak today. What I'd like to highlight in this presentation, I'll be taking a bit of a high-level view of our biosecurity system now, and I was involved somewhat with the CGMMV incursion and worked closely with Greg during parts of that, and it was a very stressful and anxious period. So I guess what I'll be highlighting today is that our system is a complex system, and that we are going to come under more increasing internal and external biosecurity challenges into the future. And really I'd like everyone to take home the message that preparedness is of utmost importance. But what I'd like to start with today is the why. So why would you come here today to hear about biosecurity, and why do we have a biosecurity system in the first place? Well, at the crux of it is maintenance of food security at very high level, and that's a concept that all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs, their preferences, and maintain an active lifestyle. So there are many challenges with maintaining food security at a global level. As we know, they include increasing population, changing diets. We have climate change issues, and that links very closely with water availability. We have less farmers coming through the system, soil health issues. One I'd particularly like to focus on today, of course, is pest pressure. The Food and Agriculture Organisation estimates that between 20 and 40% of crop yields globally are reduced each year due to damage by pests and diseases. That's actually a really high percentage when you think about it. As we know, an important sustainer of food security is the supply chain, so maintaining markets And as we know, during a biosecurity event, particularly a significant one, we can have significant disruptions to our market access. And a good example of this is market access during the tomato potato psyllid incursion, particularly during the first 6 months of that incursion in WA. So when we talk about plant biosecurity, specifically what we mean is a set of measures designed to protect the crops or a subgroup of crops from an emergency plant pest at a national, regional or individual farm levels. So when I talk about a pest, this could mean an insect, bacterium, a virus, a virid, or weeds. So there are many different kinds. And an important take-home message here is that biosecurity can be maintained not only by governments, but also by the individual, by the business, and by organisations, and particularly at a regional or a local level. So today I'm particularly going to cover current challenges to our system and also just highlight a couple of biosecurity initiatives that we're running or collaborating on through AUSVEG. So global biosecurity systems in each country are generally set up as a systems approach, which means that there are procedures and requirements put in place before a perceived risk reaches our border. So that might be putting in place import conditions pre-border, or it might be inspection of produce at the border, or it might be something to do with eradication or containment of the pest once the pest has been found in a country and begins to establish. So to maximise return on investment, these requirements are generally risk-based. So as an example, the Torres Strait island chain is seen to be a high-risk pathway for pests moving down south through the strait onto the Australian mainland so as a high-risk pathway. And for the best return on investment, the Australian government makes sure there are resources allocated for surveillance in the Torres Strait area and in the Northern Australian quarantine zone. So as a rule, detection and control of a pest becomes more difficult the more the pest moves through the biosecurity continuum. So as it moves from pre-entry to port of entry to our production zones. So essentially, the Australian biosecurity system and global systems can be sectioned up into 4 different goals. They are prevention, or in some cases, you may call this preparedness, eradication, containment, and management. So in order to achieve certain goals, there are different activities, initiatives that are carried out to achieve them. So as an example, in order to achieve prevention or maintain preparedness, the Australian government may put in place inspection procedures for imported produce or undertake risk assessments on produce that will be or may be imported into the country. At the other end of the spectrum, in terms of management, you may get a launch of a farm hygiene program, or you might have your RDC stepping in to launch an research and development project on a particular pest. So who undertakes these activities? And one thing I will point out before I move on, similarly to what I was saying before, the further along a pest moves into the biosecurity continuum, so for instance, if it becomes established in a production zone, the greater investment is needed to control or even eradicate that pest. So in terms of who undertakes certain activities within our system, there are a few main players in our current biosecurity system. So you've got your Federal Department of Agriculture up here at the top, so Department of Agriculture and Water Resources. And you have your state Department of Primary Industries and Territory Department of Primary Industries, Plant Health Australia, and also industry. So when I say industry, what I mean is your research and development corporations, such as Hort Innovation, peak industry bodies, such as AUSVEG and others, your growers, and those involved in the supply chain. And while I've put in this very simplistic schematic here that the federal department, for instance, takes a great role in prevention, and your state and territory DPIs play a large role in, say, eradication and containment of certain pests, and industry plays a great role in management, there is also quite a lot of collaboration throughout the entire system. So over the last 30 years, our biosecurity system has changed quite a bit and become more and more complex. And one particularly complicated aspect of this system is eradication, and what happens in the case of a suspect pest being detected in a production zone or anywhere in Australia for that matter. So just as a bit of a schematic, if there is a pest detection and it's reported and it looks like an unusual pest, that pest is reported to the State Department of Primary Industries, who then reports that pest detection to the Commonwealth, so the Federal Department of Agriculture. It needs to be determined whether this is in fact a new pest, or is it just a variant of a pest that we have already. In some cases, it's found that no, we already have this pest. It's not new, and therefore current management should continue as per usual. In some cases, it's found that this pest is a new pest or an exotic pest to Australia. So in that case, this particular outbreak would be pushed under what's called the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed, which is an arrangement between industries and government to undertake certain emergency procedures if an exotic pest is found. There's a technical committee that sits under the auspices of the deed, and in the case of an exotic pest incursion, their first duty is to assess whether the impact of a pest on an industry would be such that it could be classed as what's called an emergency plant pest. If it's deemed not to be an emergency plant pest, the outbreak is moved out from under the deed, and generally the pest is left to industry to manage, and there may be a need for management plans, or in some cases that pest could be managed under already existing management plans for other pests. If it's found that this pest is an emergency plant pest deed, the next role of that technical committee is to assess whether the pest could be technically feasible to eradicate. So looking at the cost of eradication and the available control measures that we have on hand to potentially eradicate the pest. If it is recommended and agreed that the pest can't be feasibly eradicated, or we don't have control measures that could eradicate the pest, then again the outbreak moves out from under the deed process. And in this case, industry and government may choose to fund a transition to management program to ease the transition from a pest under potential eradication or response to a management plan structure. And in these cases, these transition to management plans are cost shared, and that is where your industry emergency plant pest response levies come into play. So one example of a pest undergoing a current transition to management program is tomato potato psyllid. In some cases, a pest can't be or isn't deemed to be eradicable, and in those cases, that pest might not be dealt with under a transition to management plan. However, such a pest might be dealt with under a different arrangement. So, for instance, in the case of cucumber green mottle mosaic virus, industry is taking the lead on an R&D project to learn how to manage that virus better. And in some cases, a pest has a high potential to be eradicated. One example in horticulture at the moment of a current eradication response is banana freckle. There are other examples of successful eradications in horticulture in the past. They include black sigatoga, oriental fruit fly, and giant African land snail, but these responses are quite rare. So in terms of current challenges faced by our biosecurity system, by now you would probably appreciate that the system is reasonably complicated and has quite a few players, and it is evolving. There was a 2014 report developed by CSIRO which suggested that the current status quo, so the current way in which our Australian biosecurity system has been developed and is actioned, might not actually be sufficient to combat future challenges. So one such future challenge is plant biosecurity resourcing. So for appropriate activities to be carried out at each point of the biosecurity continuum, we do need appropriate resourcing and experience in plant biosecurity. It's well known that we have had a reduction in experienced biosecurity and extension personnel in our state DPIs over the last few decades. So in 1981, the Commonwealth Extension Services Grants Program was discontinued, and this was a subsidy given by the Commonwealth to state departments of agriculture to fund extension services. So, of course, we lost quite a few extension personnel during that era. In 1996, there was a fairly sizable review of our biosecurity system conducted. It was called the NAN review, and it noted that incursions of emergency plant pests was approximately 10 times higher than that of emergency animal pests in the 25 years prior to that report. And in 2008, more recently, we had another sizable review of the biosecurity system, and in this case, the Bureau review urged that the states avoid further reducing their capability in biosecurity. However, technology and techniques for sensing and eradicating pests have been on the improve over the last few decades as well, and this has increased efficiencies and sensitivity. So it does make the issue of state biosecurity resourcing a very complex one and very difficult to pin down. However, we do know that reduced capacity, particularly in state agencies, does lead to a reduction of capability, with more staffs needing to become generalists and needing to cover more bases to cover the shortfall. So, as globalisation continues, we'll also come under increasing pressure from particularly international trade. And we do know that incursions are often linked to ports of entry. So on this map, I have represented by the green crosses our major vegetable production regions around Australia, and represented by the red circles are the major urban areas in Australia. So some of you may have noticed in the media and by other means that we've had a few brown marmorated stink bug incursions on the mainland over the last couple of months. And they have been brought in on shipping containers. So they overwinter in shipping containers coming from Europe and America. They fall asleep, and a few days later they find themselves in Australia. So Australia currently has more than 70 ports that support trade, and in 2014 and 2015 there were 876 cruise ships visiting Australia's ports, and that's tipped to significantly increase over the next few years. And particularly the volume of sea trade is expected to double over the next 20 years. So this is a screen capture from marine traffic captured this Monday. It was on the 19th of March at 12:15 p.m. So Australia has enjoyed a level of isolation in the past, and this has helped us in a biosecurity sense. But you can see by the number of sea vessels coming to and leaving our shores, particularly between us and Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, that they almost form a land bridge of sorts between us and those other countries. So there is another kind of port that's heavily associated with urban areas, of course, and that's airports. So over the next, leading up to 2050, the aircraft industry is expecting a 7-fold increase in air traffic. So a few of you may have watched a documentary a few months ago called The City in the Sky, which was aired by ABC, and they mentioned that at any one time there may be 1 million people in the sky, which is just mind-boggling. So this is another screen capture taken last Monday again of the air traffic coming to Australia and from Australia at the same time. Here you see a graph that shows or displays short-term passenger arrivals between 2008 and 2017 during the month of November. You can see how much it's increased from around 450,000 people entering Australia as short-term visitors in 2008 to approximately 750,000 people in 2017. Therefore, the biosecurity risk that we face via air travel is most likely going to increase. So over the past few years, biosecurity issues have been regularly aired in the media, and you would have all noticed this. When we do have biosecurity incursions, so industry suffers quite a few negative impacts and they include reduced production, so reduced plant health, as well as dumping of produce, property quarantine, and trade bans, and they can lead to some serious financial impacts. Because a biosecurity issue is usually related to dealing with a new pest and one that we might not know much about, state governments who are leading on biosecurity eradications need to be often quite innovative in how they go about an eradication. A good example of that is the varroa mite eradication in Townsville. The Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries are currently using the bee eater, so the regurgitated food from the bee eater, to find local Asian honeybee nests and check those nests for varroa mites. So that's actually a really good example of an innovation that's being used during a current biosecurity or pest eradication. I'd just like to give you a snapshot now about some current biosecurity initiatives that are being led by industry, and certainly these are just a snapshot, and these are the initiatives in which AUSVEG is involved, but there are many other initiatives out there that I won't mention today, both within vegetables, but also I will say that other industries such as grains are really very good at their farm hygiene initiatives and other biosecurity activities. So since 2014, we AUSVEG have been running our vegetable and biosecurity program, and we're currently in the second phase, which is running from 2016 to 2019, and it's co-managed between AUSVEG and Plant Health Australia. The whole program centres around raising awareness about farm biosecurity best practice and also trying to increase adoption of farm biosecurity best practice. The program is currently sectioned up into 5 major streams of activities. Firstly, communication. So you can see the fact sheets that we've got here on the screen, making sure growers are aware of current pest issues, for instance, any biosecurity activities going on in their states. So there's a really heavy communication component. And you can see there's a picture here of myself giving a workshop last September on some biosecurity findings from the US. Farm biosecurity is another work stream within the program. So we've developed a farm biosecurity planning workshop that we're currently rolling out nationally through the VegNET coordinators and others. There's a preparedness element. So we have had a bit to do with developing our industry biosecurity plan. So preparing our industry for the future. What do we need to do on what pests? Contingency plans, things like that. There's a response element, so we often do get exotic pests that affect the vegetable industry. Brown marmorated stink bug is a recent one that is a good example. So we usually are involved in industry responses. And urban biosecurity is a new initiative, and we're about to start a pilot in Melbourne looking at how we can increase awareness of urban dwellers on the importance of biosecurity and get them involved in reporting suspect pests so we can get onto those pests quicker. Preparedness for the vegetable leaf miner is another really important project that we're working on with a bunch of project partners. So the vegetable leaf miner is currently found in Cape York Peninsula and nowhere else in Australia. It has a very, very broad host range, so it affects over 300 plant species within the nurseries industry and the vegetable industry, and also in the melons industry. So while we don't have this pest now, it's very likely that the veggie leaf miner will spread further south over the next few years. So as an industry, we want to be prepared for that. So our industry partners include CSER, who's leading on the project, the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources, Plant Health Australia, and the University of Melbourne. And lastly, the National Tomato Potato Psyllid Coordinator Program was launched about 6 months ago. So Alan Nankerville, who was formerly of the Plant Biosecurity CRC, is providing a link between the Transition to Management Program being headed up by DPIRD in the West, and also the rest of the industry current activities related to tomato potato psyllid, and making sure that we're investing where we need to invest to ensure that we're prepared for tomato potato psyllid spreading in the future, and what we need to look at in regards to being prepared for the CLSO pathogen, which is carried by TPP, although I will state that at the moment our current population of TPP has not been shown to carry that particular bacterium. So there's Alan. So currently our initiatives run through AUSVEG are in the prevention and management space. So the farm biosecurity program sits clearly in the prevention space. Leaf miner and TPP have elements of preparedness and also management within them. It's AUSVEG's hope that going into the future, we will be less reactive to pests and more prepared, so there'll be more investment in the preparedness space so that we're not caught scrambling in the face of an exotic pest incursion in future. So with that, those are my contact details if you need to contact me, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this webinar today. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that, Jess. And look, don't forget to type those questions in now for Jess, or if you missed the chance with Greg earlier. It's a really fascinating overview that we've been provided by the couple of presenters. And I think what's really important to note is that we were attempting to get a grower perspective on the biosecurity challenge and what that's meant at a business level. But interestingly, over in the West, where we tried to focus the effort that both DPIRD are finishing their current surveillance rounds under that new transition to management plan that Jess mentioned, and it's really ramped up over in the West. So unfortunately, we couldn't have anyone join us from over there today. It might just be worthwhile for those on the line talking a little bit further where you can, just around the T2M plan with TPP and what some of Alan's work will look like in the coming 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, sure. So in regards to the transition to management plan, it actually ends in May, and there's a few different components to it. One component is the research component. It's headed up by Sonia Borton at DPIRD, and they'll be looking at sprays for the TPP population over there, and also biological controls. And all those findings from the research element will be funneled into a development of enterprise management plans, which are basically farm management plans for tomato potato psyllid. And they're being developed by DPIRD for lots of different commodity groups, including vegetables and potatoes and processed tomatoes and the nurseries industry. So out of the T2M plan, we'll get the enterprise management plans and some research, but also the DPIRD are undertaking extensive surveillance in Perth and surrounds to prove state freedom from CLSO, which is the damaging bacteria that is often carried by TPP and causes zebra chip in potatoes, but also has damaging impacts on vegetables as well. So by May, DPIRD will have had collected enough data to show, well, hopefully to prove that the state is free from CLSO or show otherwise. There's also a bit of work going on in the market access space as well, because similar to CGMMV, you know, there were market access disruptions when we found TPP in the West. So given that the transition to management plan is a short-term program and it will be ending in May, Alan's project will run for 3 years. And they in New Zealand, they actually launched a tomato potato psyllid coordinator program as well. The idea is, in New Zealand, there was a lot of communication that went out about TPP that was confusing to industry. So part of Alan's role is to make sure that everything that's communicated out to industry about TPP is correct and is clear, and to make sure that all of the good work that is done during the transition to management program in the West is not done and then forgotten. He will take that research and make sure that it will be built on in the future. So the research that's been undertaken on control of TPP, for instance, Alan will be looking at all of the previous research that's been done both in Australia and internationally and look at gaps. So do we have the best diagnostic protocol for TPP, for instance? And where those gaps are, he'll be relaying that information to Hort Innovation to make sure that we can develop up an R&D agenda for management of TPP that will make sure that we have done the relevant research before the TPP spreads to the east, to make sure that growers in the West can more effectively manage TPP and to prepare for CLSO.
Great, thanks for that, Jess. Just one thing I picked up in your presentation at a national level, and Greg, yours at a regional level, was the importance of collaboration, just given the number of players involved in this particular issue. And I guess the question to both of you, and we might start with Jess, is just what's being done to get those crop groups or cross industries actually working together, given that some of these pests, don't adhere to our levy paying crop system that we've got for funding these types of initiatives sometimes.
Yeah, sure. Going back one step, I will say that when I started in the role, it was, I guess, really important that we as an industry worked really well with the governments involved, particularly during the CGMMV incursion. So there was, Greg would know, there was a lot of work done to try and get everyone collaborating. It sometimes didn't work, sometimes did work, but we learn as we go. In terms of different crops that are affected by one pest, so leaf miner is a really good example of that. It affects nursery crops as well and melons. Our leaf miner project is a cross-sectoral project, but I think it's also really important that everyone is aware that Hort Innovation is taking the lead on launching a new initiative, which is the Plant Biosecurity Research Initiative. And this is also being, I believe, co-managed by Plant Health Australia. And the idea of that research initiative is that all the research and development corporations across all plant agriculture, so of which there are 7, will be routinely sitting in a room and pledging money to the purpose of plant biosecurity and talking about each of their initiatives in their various sectors and trying to figure out what synergies there are. This will lead to more cost-effective biosecurity programs, but also more effective biosecurity programs in general.
No, thanks, Jess. Greg, anything to add there, just from the collaboration point of view, more at a regional level?
Yeah, thanks, Carl, and everything you said, Jess, is spot on. Look, I think it's also about maintaining the awareness with our growers and the industry groups in the areas. We haven't become complacent yet because it seems to be lurching from one incursion to another and another one on the border. But it was brought home to us fairly strongly on the weekend when Cyclone Marcus came in and took out every bit of communication and power just about across the Darwin area. And yes, we just can't really afford to relax our guard in any of these things. So we just need to be talking with everybody. So interesting corollary on the cyclone. The communications was probably the biggest breakdown. The mobile phone towers have got 12 hours of power in the battery and the power's out for 4 days. And the emergency responses were going out through Facebook if nobody had any power to fire up their phones or to get any reception anyway. So there's other challenges coming down the track and we need to be on top of them before that.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Greg. Just in the interest of time, our commitment is to get you out of here and maybe off to lunch or an early lunch if it's the case over in the West. I might just mention the recording of this particular webinar will be available online, and also a copy of the slides from both presentations from Jess and Greg today. We've got a couple of other webinars coming up in this national series being delivered by VegNET. So the next one looking at spray technology in May, then robotics and automation in August, and integrated pest management in October. The details of those you can see on your screen at the moment, and if you would like to register for those, they're up on the Soil Wealth and ICP website, soilwealth.com.au under events, and you can just click the registration link as you've done for these to register for those. Lastly, a very big thank you to our presenters, Jess Lye from AUSVEG and Greg Owens from NT Farmers. I think some really good insights both at the national and regional level to build on, and I'd encourage everyone to keep the conversation going after this webinar as we all point in the same direction around better preparedness, as Jess was saying. So thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see you at the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.